I no longer live. Christ lives in me.
Mm.
If you can say that, you are already partaking of the kingdom of heaven in this life. Because heaven doesn't begin after you die. It's not something you go after you die. It begins in this life. And the trajectory that we make, either by our freely chosen virtue or our freely chosen vice, our freely chosen sin to go against God, is making a trajectory that will continue after death towards God or away from
That's
God.
beautiful. And I guess kind of taking that analogy, if we, how do I want to phrase this? So we can become those pieces of glass, we can become that vessel, but are there also relationships which can foster that love of Christ, that love of God, that light of God? Is that like in marriage? Is that in celibacy? Or is that just simply in friendships? How does that kind of relate?
Oh, that's a good question too, brother. You got some good questions.
We do our best over here. We do our best.
Um, yes, so Father Thomas Hopko, blessed memory, he said, it's impossible to go to heaven alone. I mean, this is a classic kind of Orthodox teaching. It's impossible to be saved alone. The only thing you can do alone is go to hell. I like that. I like that quote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're made in the image of God, and God is a triunity, is a community of persons, three divine persons in relationships of love, where the Greek word perikoresis even means interpenetration, which means you find your life in the being of the other. The Father loves the Son and the Spirit. The Spirit loves the Father and the Son. The Son loves the Father and the Spirit. There's a community of love here. And so if we're made in the image of that God, then the way to personhood is in relationships of love.
Mm-hmm.
And not the love towards a hamburger or necessarily eros, right? I'm not saying sexuality is part of every human person, but the ultimate model for human beings is Jesus Christ, and he never had sex with anybody. And the ultimate model for human holiness, when you're not God in the flesh, is the Panagia, is the Theotokos. She's the ever Virgin Mary. She's the holiest person ever to live. That wasn't God.
Mm-hmm.
John the Baptist, Jesus said he's the greatest man born of women. No one is greater than John the Baptist, right? I mean, Panagia, she's a woman though, born of woman. And he was the first monastic living in the desert, and he got his head chopped off for speaking against sexual sin, right? So were these people less than human because they never had sex with somebody? Did they have a diminished humanity? Or were they able to have life-giving relationships with the people around them? Of course, now you could just answer back and say, well, that's what they chose. That's what they felt called to. That's what they wanted. Okay, and we'll have to bridge that gap once we get there. But ultimately, we're saved in communion. We participate in each other's salvation. You cannot be saved alone. And that's why the general paths, the two most well-trodden paths on the road to salvation, is that of a monogamous marriage between a man and a woman, as God made in paradise. He said it's not good for men to be alone, so he brought Eve from Adam, and now we have a full, complete humanity, a man joined with a woman. And God said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and will be joined to his wife, and they'll become one flesh, right? So this is one path to salvation. And the other path would be that of Jesus, the Panagia, John the Baptist, and all those monks and celibate people who have offered their love to all the people around them in a non-sexual way, in the storge, in the philia, which is something that I think we've lost in our culture because our culture is so eroticized.
Mm-hmm.
With pornography, with magazines. You can go buy, I don't know, a candy bar at a grocery store, and there's, I don't know, all sorts of crazy things. And we get smartphones into the hands of kids so young. We've been trained on a subhuman, sexuality. And so rather than being taught by our parents, if we even had a man and a woman as our parents, so many broken homes, whatever homes. So it's like, we have a skewed view of what the word love means in this culture now today. So, so we've lost the ability for people of the same sex, and maybe it's not totally lost, to have a deep, meaningful, loving in the terms of philia, like David and Jonathan, or some of these, Gregory the theologian and Basil the Great. At Basil the Great's funeral, Gregory the theologian said, "We had one soul in two bodies." Now, they never had sex, but there's a depth to that kind of a love of relationship that maybe some even married couples don't have. They have a bad marriage. But I think in this culture, because the only what love means is having sex with somebody. In this culture, maybe not for everybody, but it's so tied up in that it's hard to say I love you to a man without him wondering, or you wondering, well, man, what's going on, right? And for women, we're all men here, but if we could retake back that idea of brotherhood and that deep understanding and communion, maybe even as warriors against the devil or something. I don't know if we're not going to go actually join the army and put our lives on the line and get that kind of relationship there. The ability to live in community, to have an intentional, house where Christian-minded men are trying to work out, either before they're married or if they, trying to just live a celibate, holy life, And it's, and then again, you could just answer back, well, it's because they chose it. But monastics, right? They chose this celibate way. Well, it's very rare for somebody to live in a cave by themselves. That's less than 1% of monastics live in a community.
Right. Yeah.
They live in a monastery with other members of their family now, and with the Yeron or the Yerons, so the abbot or the abbess, as the father or mother figure of that brotherhood or sisterhood, we say,
Right.
that Silalia, where you lean on each other. And how can you learn humility, Basil the Great says in his long rules, if you have nobody to humble you? How can you learn obedience if you have nobody to be obedient to? How can you learn self-sacrifice if there's nobody to, take a second place to and to prefer? So all these virtues are worked out in community, right? And so we have the community of our church family, we have the community of our own personal family. And I think at this point we have to say, we can really only speak as an Orthodox Church to those people who want to follow Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
This message as to what our church actually teaches about these things is intended for all human beings who want to listen. But if you could give a rat's whatever about the Bible, or if you don't believe that you're created by God in his image with a direct and intentional purpose and a design towards human flourishing that God himself commands, doesn't suggest. And if you think, I don't know, you just an evolved accident and a monkey and no soul and there's no heaven and hell and there's no judgment, and really at that point it doesn't really matter. We can't really say too much to somebody like that. It's like, well, God bless you, we'll pray for you and we love you. We don't want you to go to jail or live your life. What can we say? But if somebody wants, because that's what Jesus said, if anybody wants to be my disciple, let him take up his cross and follow me. And we're not, like Muhammad in the fifth in the 6th century, with the rise of Islam, it was like convert or die at the edge. So he was leading an army. But Jesus never converted people like that. He respects human freedom so much, doesn't force us to believe in him. So I think this message really is for people who love Jesus Christ, who realize that he is the Messiah, that all the Old Testament prophets prophesied about, that he is God in the flesh, and that the Old and New Testaments are a reflection of God's will for mankind, as interpreted by the Orthodox Church, not on its own. It didn't fall from heaven. You can't point to a Bible until the New Testament, at least until the 4th century, right? So the church is primary, the community that Jesus established on the foundation of his apostles, and that this way of life as lived out by hundreds of thousands of saints and by the church for 2,000 years is the best way towards a perfect human life, which is based and grounded in the life of Jesus Christ in the flesh.
Yeah.
He's the definition for what a human being is. And he never sinned. He was perfectly obedient to God's will. So we measure how human we are against how like Jesus we are.
Wow. That's a
So
thought
sinning
experiment.
would be to do something that would make us less human, because we're deviating from what a human being is as God's purpose and
Right.
design. But that makes no sense to somebody who doesn't believe that human beings are made by God. They're just self-caused, and you're just chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it doesn't matter if they don't want to believe or aren't looking. Yeah, it's a very good point. It's a very good point.
So, last question for this, what is love, would be, because we've been talking about loving and loving God and loving someone else, but like, so does loving someone mean accepting every aspect of them without question, or are there certain things you don't have to necessarily love about them, but still love them as a person?
this is an extremely important question. And I think due to the extremely polarized nature
Mm-hmm.
of our political landscape in America and of our society as a whole, we have gone literally into the category of what would be, maybe in psychological terms, a dysfunctional family, where in a dysfunctional family, to not agree with me means that you don't love me. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But in a functional family, in a truly loving family, you can disagree. You can talk about things. You bring things to the dinner table and you have a discussion. Not everybody might agree on the topic,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that doesn't mean you're out of the family now, or I'm going to beat you with a stick or something, or, I'm going to disown you from my life, And further, it would not be loving if we take God's definition of love, which is the desire for the perfection of a human being in Christ.
Mm.
To accept somebody's sin without any desire for them to move past it. And I really dislike when somebody just says, well, this is how I am. Because you know what that means? If it has to do with some sin that they're talking about, that means that they're basically accepting that this is some essential part of them that they can never move past or be transformed to grow beyond, or to be healed from, or to be victorious over.
Mm.
Do you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
if you told me that every time you go into the mall, you really just have this itching desire to steal stuff, and you get really good at it. You light a firecracker and throw it, and then everybody runs, and you grab a backpack and you're out of the mall and nobody knows. And it's like, if I knew this about you and I was too afraid to say, hey, stop. I mean, if to you, bringing up something that I was concerned about was hating you, or if you saw stealing as some essential part of your identity, and so to say that this might be wrong, now I'm attacking you as a person, like your unique and unrepeatable personhood. Now I've done something actually terrible. I've attacked, the part of God in you almost, or something. But if we see rather sin as like a parasite, moving the person away from their original intended, not program, from their original intended, purpose by God. If sinning is becoming less human,
Right.
then I think the unloving thing would be to accept somebody as they are and to not care that their lifestyle or their behavior or what has, in the spiritual term, their passions are overwhelming them and becoming, in lockstep with their lifestyle and their personality, and are going to eventually, if they don't repent, drag them to hell. I think that somebody that would not have the courage and true love, because as we said, love is desiring the highest good for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not good for somebody to go against God. It's not in their best interest.
Yeah.
So I think the truly loving thing is to be able to open a dialogue about these things. And it's very tempting to think, oh, I'm better because I don't struggle with that. Like, I'm not a thief, so you must be some way down the rung, or we have to be super careful that we're not condemning others.
We have to go into it with love, almost.
With love. And you can only speak to somebody and in a way that they'll be able to hear you if you have a personal relationship of trust with them.
Right.
If the only way you can hear an insult, or not an insult, the only way you can hear a critique of your character, of your lifestyle, of your behavior, is if you know that the person has your best interest in mind. If somebody insults me and I know they don't care about me, I'm like, whatever. I mean, that's not the right. You should love your enemies and bless those who curse you. But it's like, I'm not going to listen to one thing you say because I know you hate me. Why would I listen to you? You don't have my best interest in me. You don't love me. You don't want the best for me. But if somebody looks me in the eye, who I have a relationship with, and they say, Sarah, somebody like my wife, right? When you do this, it does hurt because of my ego, right? I mean, but I know that the person wants what's best for me, and even if they could be wrong in their assessment, right?
Yeah.
But if it's coming from that kind of a place, that's love. But just saying, however you are, with all your, you have to. The only way to love somebody is to accept them as they are. It's like, I don't think so, because that's I think that's more like abuse. If parents don't discipline their children, they'll grow up to be monsters. I mean, children are not. I mean, we are made by God good, but because of our corrupted nature, children are selfish. I have 3 kids right now, and my oldest daughter will eat all the candies from the 1-year-old. Won't let her have any unless we started to form hey, you have to think about others, not just yourself.
Just like what you're saying, it may seem disrespectful, it may seem in that moment hurtful or hateful, but if it truly is like what you're saying, someone who's looking out for you for your best interest, it is out of love, and it will put you on a better path, just like God gives us these commandments out of love to put us on a better path to his kingdom.
And the kid's not going to understand that. Sometimes my daughter says, I hate you. You're so mean, Daddy. Sorry that I'm not letting you, jump off the refrigerator onto a pillow with a tile floor underneath. If you missed, now we're going to the yard. And I'm the killjoy. I'm the bad one, right? But it's like, you're being crazy, right? So it's hard. It's hard, these things. And we're not talking about children. We're talking about now adults, right? And all these other things. So, but God ultimately is our Father, and the good Father, a loving Father. If we go back to the original word, God is good, period. And he wants what's best for us, period, all the time, every time, in every possible way.
Yeah.
Then a father has a responsibility to discipline his children and to give them the best chance for a good life, which is not to lie to them and just say, everything how you want is I'll just give you whatever you want. I don't want to go to school. Okay, just stay home and play video games for the rest of your life. I mean, it doesn't work, Yeah. That's not loving. I accept you for who you are. If my wife accepted me for who I am, I'd be a total bum. You know, she demands, you know, a certain level of, you know, self-sacrifice, as I do from her, right? Because that's the only way to grow. We pull each other up in our relationships. We don't make excuses for.
All right, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a perfect place to end out this conversation of what is love